very frustrated with requirements and demand for their capacity, for their time, coming from lots of different places, and not having a shared way of understanding what all those demands were, so that conversations could be had or debate could be had about the ways of managing that capacity, sharing it around, that sort of thing. And so they come up with this concept of, which does sound admittedly a little academic when you put it as a taxonomy of demand, but it's a reasonable way to term it, of splitting up all the different things that engineering teams and product teams are expected to deliver and giving them names. And so the top level categories in example one there, which is actually the zero taxonomy of demand, of run, grow, and scale, were basically reflecting the three things that the business was asking the product and technology teams to do. So we want you to, well, most of the time they just assumed they were running it, to be honest. They were actually wanting the teams to grow and scale, and then hopefully they just have time to run. What the technology team wanted to point out is that running has a whole lot of stuff that takes a whole lot of time, and we weren't talking about it enough. And then growing and scaling, we're talking about the other two big things that the business were doing. Now, within those high-level categories are some subcategories. And what happened over time as we started framing conversations about capacity and planning and budgeting and roadmaps and that sort of thing in those terms, is a shared language evolved that made it easier for teams with different perspectives to be able to talk about the same things, to make those decisions and have those planning conversations. So it was a really, powerful concept. And when I thought about it, I realized that I'd actually done the same thing. So example 2 here, when I was the founding CTO at Ambit. And so we were a small venture funded startup. We grew reasonably quickly. And so we went from me writing code to sort of team of 15, writing code and shaping the product and designing the product and all those sorts of things. And of course, as that kind of happens and you're starting to really burn a bunch of cash, there also need to be those same kind of conversations, planning conversations and shared language. And so the 3 pillars that I came up with in that situation were build, channel, and innovate. And I'll just explain about those a little bit more, because they were important trade-offs for our business. So build was sort of the equivalent of Xero's run, in that it was kind of more business as usual stuff, dealing with support, dealing with what I like to call necessary engineering, which is all the things that engineering teams have to do. And that's things like, new versions of third-party dependencies come out. You got to upgrade them, otherwise the whole thing just starts to decay. There's little bits of re-architecture that happen all the time, and that's all just necessary. There's no point arguing about it. Through to things like customer requested features and sort of slowly evolving the architecture for future demand. The other 2 pillars of channel and innovate, that was about building out new third-party integration. So we had new ways to go to market, new audiences, new customers, and innovating, which at that stage, so this was back in the first AI spring, when everyone got excited about AI for the first time in about, at that stage, 30 years. I thought it had all finished, but everyone got excited again about 2 years ago. This first time around, there was some natural language approaches that were evolving to make these chatbots. So we were basically doing chatbots for enterprise on enterprise companies' websites, where there were interesting, novel approaches to things. And so there was this idea that we needed to innovate as well. And of course, we told our investors that's what we were doing. We needed to innovate. And so we had this problem of balancing across those 3 things. But by using that build, channel, innovate breakout, I could create really simple models to have those planning conversations. So this triangle with those 3 pillars of the taxonomy of demand on it was basically how I did this. And so what I'd say ahead of a quarter, and of course we're a startup, so we're moving fairly quickly, and a quarter was the right sort of horizon for this. We'd actually decide, roughly speaking, how much of our capacity were we going to expend on each of those 3 taxonomy of demand areas. And at this sort of level, this is something that the board can understand, that the rest of the management team can understand, the sales team can understand, and you can have that debate about what does that actually mean. So my example here from way back in 2019, the first quarter of the year, we sort of had this relatively even split between channel, build, and innovate, with most of the focus still going on the build. But when we got to the second quarter, we realized that pushing further into the rest of the channels, and this was a strategic decision at the time, wasn't really driving the business in the right way. And so what we should do instead is to try to put more weight on innovating. But at the same time, of course, there were lots of customer required features starting to come through and that sort of thing. So we chose to split our time that way. So using a very simple model like this, some kind of visual, some kind of shared language, it's just a way to all get on the same page and make sure that everyone in the business can have the same understanding of splitting that out. So there we go. That's tool one. Tool two, the language of risk. So risk is something that I think serves a really useful purpose, particularly when you're talking to people who are not coming from a technology perspective or who don't have a deep level of technical understanding. Everyone who's involved in business knows what risk is. But what's really important when it comes to a product and technology concept is to think about where risk pops up. And in the way that we plan, in the way that we decide what we're going to do, in the way that we listen to customers, in the way that we make promises about delivering. And what I've got there in those bullet points is 4 of the things that people often forget about, which is that while there is risk of doing something in particular, so we might talk about, well, we could ship this particular feature, or we could make this change to the architecture to try and scale better, or whatever it happens to be, there is also a lot of risk involved in doing nothing. And so Black Swan Farming, they specialize in talking about applying the cost of delay as a way of prioritizing work to do in a product organization or any business, really. And what those risks are of doing nothing or doing something later or doing nothing for now, so kicking the can down the road, is they're really actually having an effect on in terms of cost of delay. So you're getting an increasing risk of having some kind of cost to the business if you do nothing or do something later or do nothing for now. So I sometimes find, particularly in a kind of product road mapping context, that there's these sort of debates about, well, we can't do that now, or can't we just leave that till later, or why can't we wait until we've got customer X before we do this, and so on. And it's useful at that point to think about risk, not just in terms of the classic kind of red, amber, green likelihood, impact, what's actually going to happen here in terms of severity for our risk, but also thinking about how risk has a time dimension. So while we might take a bit of a snapshot today and say, what's the risk of not doing that? Or what's the risk of doing that now? What we might forget to do is really clearly articulate how that risk changes over time. So sure, there might not be much risk in leaving that feature until later today, but what about a couple of quarters out? What about in the second half? What about the year after that? The longer we leave that, how is that risk changing? And I think when you're having those kinds of difficult conversations with someone who's not coming from a product and technology perspective and trying to explain why we need to do this thing that the customers can't really see, that's not adding any incremental revenue right away, why it's important to do it now rather than later. And so using, simple visualizations like the one that I've got here in terms of how risk changes over time and how we might go from a green today to a red later in the year is a way of actually explaining that in a language that the rest of the business can understand. So that's tool number 2. Dates. So this bit could go on for quite some time because dates are really, really hard. And where I find myself in conversations, or at least helping and supporting product teams, where they've reached a point where there is, some tension or misunderstanding or disagreement in the business, a lot of that disagreement, really, the symptoms of it, where it comes out, is in terms of discussions about dates. So every founder who hasn't spent a lot of time in product and technology, but spends a lot of time talking to customers, so your typical kind of sales background founder, would really love to be able to make promises about when a particular feature or capability or something like that in the product was going to be delivered. And that's totally reasonable within a certain horizon. Where it's not reasonable is making promises that are further out in terms of planning horizon, where there is a high degree of uncertainty. So this all has a really solid theoretical foundation. And this picture I've drawn here is based on the classic cone of uncertainty. So this was a guy called Barry Boehm who did a whole lot of project research a long time ago, and it wasn't even on software projects, but it applies just as well to modern software product management as it does to the sorts of things that he was studying. That showed how estimates vary over time. And so what he actually found after looking at all these different projects was that it was not uncommon for variability in estimates really early in a project to be 4 times the size that they were originally estimated. So I'm sure you've all probably been in conversations where someone jokingly says, the engineering team comes up with an estimate and someone says, oh, well, you can double that, right? Well, it's actually worse. You can double it and you can double it again, because the variability really does go up to 4 times on wide when someone actually goes out there, does the primary research, looks at all this stuff and says, how bad could this be? This could be 4 times bad. And I think we all know that sometimes the degree of uncertainty is so high in software projects that it might be 10 times the original size, because there's just things you don't know up front, things that you can explain with the language of risk that mean that variability is really, really high. This is quite funny. There's a quarter under that's possible as well. We don't really talk about that. Sometimes things do get delivered early, but the point is when they do get delivered early, it's not by 4 times. It's the inverse of that. So that's that obviously means it's very, very hard to make an estimate up front. And in fact, you could argue that it's almost, there's no value really in making estimates at that kind of level. What I like to think about with dates though, with this sort of thing, is that when you are making estimates at this level, it's almost like you have to turn it around and you say, well, no, we're not going to estimate, but how about we agree when we would like this to happen? When will we like this feature to be delivered? When will we like this bit of re-architecture to be finished? When will we like this website to be ready for this campaign or whatever it is? And so that becomes a target rather than a delivery estimate. And this is not easy to get a team around to this way of thinking, right? Particularly the sort of businessy end of the business, the front end of the business, accepting that there's a difference between targets and commitments. So I'm not suggesting this is a magic wand, magic bullet, silver bullet, but it is, without doing it, it is very, very hard to be able to have sensible planning conversations. And so if the business can understand about this variability of estimates up front, and the engineering team can understand that what they're making is not a promise based on a solid estimate, but a target that they're shooting for, then things actually start to get a little bit more sensible. So when you're making estimates out at this sort of level, they really need to be on a planning horizon that is not a particular date and time, right? So we can't say, okay, we don't know much about it. We could have 4 times variability, but we'll try delivering it on the 12th of May, because that doesn't make sense. What we want to target instead is maybe a quarter, or maybe it's a half, like it's got to be a chunk of time where there's a lot of room for flexibility. As we get through the work, though, as we start to de-risk things, so the technical teams working on the technical solutions and starting to understand better how to implement things, the design teams out there talking to users, uncovering problems, prototyping, testing, slowly that variability actually reduces. And so as we get closer to those targets can get firmer, and we can actually narrow the window in which we're willing to work to those targets. And then finally, as we get really close to delivery, we can actually make commitments. And I think making commitments when it's the right time to do it is actually a really powerful thing to do, because it's like a compromise. Well, compromise sounds bad. It's like a deal between the stakeholders in the business and the people who are delivering the work to say, we'll work to a target, and in exchange, so will you be flexible enough to allow for us to work to a target that's called a quarter or a month or whatever. In exchange, as we get within, I don't know, a month, 2 months, it depends on the sort of nature of the work, we will actually make a commitment and we'll drive really hard to get to that commitment. What tends to happen though is that there's a stalemate and both sides are kind of refusing to come to the middle like that. And I think that's one of the biggest things that sort of unseats that trust between technical teams, product teams, and the business, and so on. So I'd really encourage anyone to try and get this point across and work towards it. And so I think of it, really clearly as there are targets and there are commitments. They are 2 different things. And every conversation you have about dates, you just got to keep on hammering that home A target is something that provides a time frame to work to when planning. It's not something you tell a customer that's when it's coming. A commitment is something that the whole team feels comfortable. It's like, yeah, no, we can live with that. Yes, it might be a bit of a scramble if we're wrong on a couple of things, but this is actually something that we can do. And there's a big difference with the commitment in terms of the kind of mitigations we might take if we find that things are going a little bit wobbly. So if a commitment's been made, the business should be at a point where if the time is drifting, they're willing to put even more work or resource or buy pizzas or whatever it is to get that thing over the line. It's got to be that kind of thing. If you treat every target like that, you don't really have a workable business, and you've got burned out people and all the rest of it. So there we go. That's dates. Trade-offs. The iron triangle. So this is something that I like to talk about quite a bit. The iron triangle is a concept from project management, traditional project management, that still tends to turn up with business audiences. And so this is the idea that you've got scope, schedule, and resources. You can trade off two of those things in order to achieve the other thing. And the assumption is that quality is always constant. Now, there is a better version of the iron triangle that acknowledges that we're not delivering projects. The software projects don't go, we start it, we end it, now we're done and we all walk away. Generally, we're nurturing a product, we're delivering features over time, it's long-lived, all of those sorts of things. So the Rally software version of that is to instead put on our triangle value, capacity, and time to market, but still leave quality fixed in the middle. So when we talk about these sorts of planning concepts, you'll be very familiar with these. Time to market is really what's important when we're talking about products, right? It's how fast we can get it out there. And that might be in terms of getting value to a group of users because they need it for some reason. Like maybe that feature, they actually need it to do something in their business to make the product worthwhile. Perhaps it's a competitive thing. So the faster we can get it into market, the earlier we can steal a march on competitors. Perhaps it's a new business and we're actually going to launch. And the faster we get out there, the less risk there is that some of our potential customers have gone with another product or something like that. So that's that time to market dimension. And, often businesses by default optimize for time to market, right? There's a lot of the sense of we've got to get it out there, how fast we got to go faster kind of thing. And in the rush to do that, it's very easy to let the other things go. And the most significant, of course, of this and what is the primary business for your average product person is delivering value. Because if we reduce the time to market, we also reduce the amount of value that it's really feasible to deliver, given the capacity that's available. So the capacity that's available is, of course, the people. So that's like, the engineering teams, the product people who are leading the work, the designers, the support people who have to support, all those sorts of things add up to capacity. What tends to happen in a business where people are maybe not so familiar with building software or have never worked in a technology team themselves is that they assume that those three dials, value, time to market, and capacity, are somewhat equal and that quality can stay constant. And so that's what leads to those conversations like, well, we're not going to be able to deliver that until August. And someone says, what if we get more developers? Can't we just get some more developers? Can we get some contractors? Can we, those sorts of decisions. And that's where I think it's important to understand that the triangle isn't equilateral. So the triangle is a bit skewed because changing capacity in a software team is not something you can do in the same way that you can lop off a bunch of value or crunch the time to market or extend the time to market. So extending the time to market is really easy, right? We can say, okay, we were going to deliver it in August, but now we'll leave it till October. The consequences of that might not be so easy. There might be some angry people going, but we've got campaigns lined up and we're expecting it and now we're going to miss the conference and that sort of thing. So I'm not saying it's easy in that sense, but to change time to market is actually, it's just a decision. It's a business decision. Value, same deal. You can say, okay, we were going to ship this much value. It was going to have this functionality. Now we're just going to trim it back a bit. It's going to be a little bit more minimum viable product or a little less lovable product. And that, again, it's a business decision. So the consequences of that might not be so good, but it's a simple business decision to make. Capacity is not like that, right? If you actually post an ad try and find some people, start a negotiation with a partner about using some of their people, whatever it is. You're probably talking about 3 months before they're actually in the seat. It will probably take them 3 months to start fitting in with the team and really getting up to speed, understanding what they're doing, all working together nicely. We're now 6 months in. And then, unless they're extraordinary individuals with some, sort of existing expertise and things, probably going to be another 3 to 6 months before they are truly productive. So you're really talking about a 12-month window from the time at which you say, yeah, let's get more capacity, to when you really have more capacity. And so I think that whenever those conversations happen, it's really important to remind everyone that that's what we're talking about. And then the second part of that, of course, is why I've got an arrow going from quality to value, because while we'd all like to say, well, quality can be kept constant, unfortunately, users see value as quality. So the perceived quality of a product isn't just, is it bug-free and relatively responsive and those sorts of things. It's also, does it do all the things that I need it to do to be able to get my job done? And if it doesn't, if there's not enough value there for me, then I see it as reduced quality. So the quality dimension cannot be held constant in the middle of that triangle. So yeah, there's your sort of mushed iron triangle, that it's really important to remind all other parts of the business when you're representing product and technology that are the realities of making those kinds of trade-offs and decisions. Cool. Alignment. So we've just got 2 things to go. Alignment in planning terms, so what we spend a lot of time thinking about in product, right, is really about the roadmap. And, roadmaps, big topic. There's a lot could be said about roadmaps. Important to establish for roadmaps is multiple planning horizons. So if you've just got one roadmap, it makes things a little bit awkward, because you'll find that stakeholders and people who are participating in planning processes start to treat the shorter term roadmap in the same way that they treat the longer term roadmap. And that's where we get some of those date problems that I was talking about before. So it feels like committing to delivering a little thing that's short term, that's coming up in 6 weeks, feels the same as making a commitment to something that should really only be a target and be very mushy and flexible and has a lot of risk around it, that's 12 months out kind of thing. So establishing what those horizons are that we can talk about in terms of what do we actually mean when we say short-term, medium-term, long-term is very important. And one of the things that I find useful to be able to define those planning horizons is that the longest term one is really, it aligns with what is our vision. So what is this aspiration? What is this thing that we are trying to be? And a vision could be lots of things. It might be stories about how we imagine our users being and the business being and that sort of thing when we get out to that kind of horizon. It might even be, kind of day in the life sort of style stories of what our users would do. It might be kind of more inward facing things about what kind of business will we be, how big will we be a kind of seen as a leader in our field, all of those kinds of things. So that's that kind of vision and aspiration. And that sits right out there for an earlier stage business, no more than 3 years. For an established business, it's probably more like 10 years. And that's our vision line. But we also need a medium term. So it seems like there's a bit of a habit in technology companies that might have a vision and it might be even really well articulated, but then we just have a short-term roadmap. And we're kind of missing that middle planning horizon of the 1 to 2 years that fits in with the strategy, like the concrete steps of the decisions we make in order to progress towards our vision. So we don't expect to ever reach our vision. Our vision is an aspiration and it changes over time. So by its nature, we never actually reach it. But our strategy are concrete things we're actually going to have a crack at doing. And then the roadmap is just outcomes that we're trying to reach along the way. And that's, 4 to 6 quarters, I reckon, is a pretty good planning horizon for any business for that one. But the other thing that's important to go with those horizons, and why I show this as a matrix, is that there are 3 perspectives or lenses over that roadmap and on all of those planning horizons. It's very common to have a business vision and a business strategy and then kind of be missing the equivalent from a product perspective. It's even more common to be missing the equivalent from a technology perspective. But unless all 3 of those are lined up, it's really hard to have conversations about whether everyone is pointing in the same direction. And so it's really hard to do all the planning stuff we've just been talking about earlier on. So how do we do that? Well, we literally just do it. So this is an example of what I mean when I say business, product, and technology. All of those things need to exist. Now, I should just add a caveat here. Sometimes business and product is kind of the same thing. And sometimes product and technology is sort of the same thing. So I wouldn't agonize about having completely separate business and product roadmaps. And for a platform company, I wouldn't agonize about having separate product and technology roadmaps. Sometimes those things sort of blur together, and that's totally fine, as long as the concepts across these things are sort of covered. So let me just walk through this example to try and make this a little bit easier to understand. So over on the left, we've got the lead in market X. So here's a pretty typical sort of vision statement for a business, like where are we trying to get to kind of thing. We're going to be the leader in some market. It might be a group of customers, might be a geography, something like that. And in our medium-term strategy, so in the next financial year, we're going to increase our share in that market by 5%. So there's a concrete step. That's a strategic decision. That's what we're going to do kind of thing. The product team might line up with that particular bit of strategy by saying, well, given where the product is today and our onboarding experience, it's not really up to being able to do that. So what we're actually going to have to do is optimize our onboarding for customers in that market, in that particular region. It's got to be way more optimal than it is today. But to be able to do that, it might be that we also need to add capacity for lots of users in our technology platform. And perhaps that's, in this particular example here, horizontal scale, right? So rather than one big server, we want to be able to have lots of little servers and that they scale really effortlessly in and out so that we can deal with different numbers of users. Now, for your typical technology company, that means we first have a whole bunch of re-architecture and re-engineering to do in the short term to be able to scale effortlessly horizontally. But if we are explicit about that and how that makes this optimization for onboarding possible and how that makes this business goal possible, then we get this nice lining up. And what that means is that the engineers and the technology team understand how they're contributing to the business's goals and vision. We have the people in the product team understanding how they're contributing, and everyone can actually get on the same page and talk the same language about it. And so if you're working somewhere where there doesn't seem to be a technology vision or a technology strategy or a technology roadmap, then I think that's a really good thing to try and push for. And in that same way of, I talked about at the beginning in terms of our responsibility as professionals to make sure the empathy and understanding is there, a good measure of whether the empathy and understanding is there is whether that's even possible. Because product people should be able to understand enough about the technology at an architectural level to understand where those sort of chunks of value line up to be able to deliver the business's goals. And if you don't, then everyone needs to get together and figure it out and have lots of difficult conversations until they actually get to that point. This is a fictional version. I'm not sure how legible the writing is on this one on a screen share, but we'll see, of my sticky roadmap. So I'm using this with a couple of clients at the moment. So this is literally Post-its on a Miro board. And the reason that I did this was to try and articulate that planning horizons, so short term, medium term, longer term, and then put it in the context of the stuff that we're actually building. So across the top are the milestones. And so I've given some examples of what I call, product milestones there. So these are things like our MVP for early adopters, unlocking our big co users, getting ready for Australia, first level scale, whatever that means kind of thing. And then for each one of those things, what's the target date? And as we get further out, it goes from being a month to a quarter to a vague kind of mid 2025 in this case. And then for each one of those things, I line up, so what's it going to do? Is it going to change our addressable customers? What's the value proposition of that to the business? What's the value proposition of that to our customers or our channel? What kind of go-to-market needs will we have across those things? And how will the non-functional constraints change as we work across those things as well? And that's really important. This is where we get to talk to each other about the things that that we all have to do to participate in that. So in my example here, I've said, right, MVP for early adopters, 50 concurrent users max. Now, the first time that you put up a sticky board like this and ask an engineering team to say how many users they can cope with, they probably don't know. And someone would have thought about it and had some discussions about it, but no one's really committed to exactly what that looks like. And it's really important to drive to that in the short term, because otherwise you will have a very difficult time when you suddenly realize you don't have the capacity and the platform to be able to do this thing. But even more important than that is when we get out to the fourth quarter, how many users do we think we'll have when we enter our key segment in Australia? Is it 200? Is it 2,000? What should we prepare for? And one of the things that you're trying to manage there as a product person is not just have we underinvested and so we won't actually be able to deal with that, but are we overinvesting? Because we don't want to overinvest, right? Because the technology team might be thinking, we're going to make this work at web scale for 200,000 customers. And that's an absolute complete waste of everyone's capacity, time, money, and all the rest of the thing if we only ever expect 200 concurrent users at that point. So it's just trying to get this consolidated picture of what are all the things that are going to go into reaching those particular milestones as we unlock value, as we progress our way down the strategy. On the very bottom row there, I tend to, these are basically epics, right? So the pink stickies are sort of chunks of stuff that needs to be done, value delivered in the platform in order to reach that particular product milestone. And so the way that we use these sorts of visuals is we'll literally have our planning conversation around it with a cross-functional group. And if there's some new thing, so it's like, we're going to try this market, or we're going to get this partner, or we're going to, bring on this customer, this major customer sort of thing, we can look across those milestones and go, where does that go? Relatively speaking, is that more urgent than readiness for Australia? No? Okay. Well, maybe we should leave readiness for Australia where it is. Is it more urgent than unlocking BigCo? Yeah, it is. Okay, well, let's insert it there, let's reorganize the board. And then let's look again at what are the go-to-market needs? What are the non-functional constraints? Have we created ourselves like a big mess here that's going to be really hard to manage? So creating some kind of central artifact where everyone can get on literally the same page and have a conversation about it is a really helpful way to do that. And, this is seriously just Miro with Post-its, right? It's actually a convenient way to organize the information. It's really easy for teams to get hung up on wanting to use tools to do this. So wanting to use, like, I don't know, Jira roadmaps or a fancy road mapping tool, product plan, something like that. At that level, you don't need information to be that structured, and sometimes it actually gets in your way because it's easier to be able to just slap extra notes on to give yourself more context rather than obsessing too much about the structure of the information, because this information is long-term enough that it's expected to change a little bit and have some flexibility, and so your tool needs that flexibility as well. Okay, so the last point, and then we'll just see if there's any questions. This one is also about getting on the same page, but this is kind of more of a soapbox thing for me. Shifting left. I think, shifting left is something we talk about a lot. I'm sure you've all worked in teams where you shift left on testing, shift left on quality, shift left on security. There's lots of things we like to shift left on, right? So the idea is, whoops, we're leaving a little bit late. We should really do that earlier in the overall software delivery process. I'm a big believer in the four-legged stool. You can tell this is an AI-generated stool from the weird back leg there. The four-legged stool, from my perspective, so the ideal group of functions or people, but maybe you've only got two people who cover these four, it doesn't really matter, but just covering off these four perspectives is product leadership, design and technology, but also product marketing. So you can see what I'm going to be shifting left on here. So in traditional linear build and go-to-market, we don't do this anymore, by the way, as an industry, which is really good. We used to just design stuff, then we'd build it, then we'd ship it, and then we would market it. So we'd talk about it to our customers. We've gotten a bit better than that. This was the first version of getting better at that. So what we started doing is after we'd shipped it, we'd actually solicit some feedback. So we would ask the customers how they felt about what we'd just sent to them. Now we've gotten even better than that, right? Because now we're doing this real sort of typical iterative contemporary thing. We'll design and then we'll actually go and prototype and test concepts with our customers and encompass that feedback in what we're doing. We'll build, we'll do the same thing. We'll ship small releases, we'll get feedback from Intercom, or we'll look at usage analytics and that sort of thing. And so we're actually getting it at that point. And then we'll ship like generally available ship sort of stuff. And we'll use similar sorts of tools and things, but we might even send out NPS surveys and that kind of thing. So we're bringing the feedback back at each one of those steps. But what tends to happen is we still don't do the same thing for marketing. So when it comes to actually talking about the value proposition in a way for our users to make a buying decision, we kind of leave that until the very end. So what I believe we really need to do is to insert an extra step, which is called decide how to talk about stuff. And I've seen some really good examples of this where good product marketers have just gone ahead and done this anyway. And before we've even started investing in designing it, we talk about how we are going to talk about this with our customers. So we decide, we actually say, what is the messaging for this value proposition? What is our description of this product? And then we go test that with them, with our customers or prospective customers. And we see whether they get it. Like, do they even understand this thing that we're talking about? Because you can ship as much valuable stuff as you want. If no one understands what they're supposed to do with it, they won't do anything with it, and it won't be any good. So the tool that I find is really useful for this is the good old AWS working backwards tool. It's something that everyone can understand about the business, across the business. Everyone's seen press releases before, everyone's seen FAQs before, and it's amazing how much risk and how many mistakes can be addressed if the first thing you do, rather than rushing out and doing a bunch of user research, is actually getting everyone together to build a press release for whatever this thing is, and then go try it. Go see if prospective customers can actually understand the messaging and the value prop of what you are wanting to ship them. So there we go. There was a whole bunch of different tools and techniques and approaches, and I just realized that I don't actually have a slide which then summarizes all of that. So let me just rush all the way back to the contents in case there was something you've already forgotten about. And we've got about 10 minutes to go. So any questions or worries or disagreements, anything like that? Anyone want to chuck something in chat or come off mute? Be very happy to chat about it. Must be comprehensive.
It was very comprehensive. Oh, Adi.
Hey, Gareth. Thanks for that.
Hey.
One question that I'd love to double click on. So on your where you have those product milestones, right, with the stickies.
Yeah.
How did you go about? I know that's supposed to align, the wider business and stakeholders and stuff. And did you align with those stakeholders around what the exact milestones are and who the addressable customers are, for example, and what the business prop is for each segment?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and that's a hard bit about product leadership, right? You're in the middle, and you have to talk to everybody, and you've got to understand where everyone's coming from. So, with the most recent example of this that I've been working on, where I started first of all was, so I was working with a CEO who is much more comfortable talking about things than writing them down. So I actually started with what were specific client projects. So he was thinking about it in terms of, I want to integrate this partner, then this partner, then this partner, and they're all important, we should do all of them kind of thing. Was actually getting an articulation of what, like PR FAQ style, so AWS working backwards style, what would each of the launches of each of those things look like? And then with lots of reassurances around, look, I'm not saying we have to do just one thing at a time, or, you're not making a decision here about the whole business lurching off to one thing and then the next thing and so on. But what would be very helpful is a sense of relative priorities. So if we've got customer A, B, C, D, what order do they go in? So in your, what order would you not want them to go in? Is customer C, if we delivered them and nothing else, would that be bad? What about customer A? What would be customer B, kind of thing? So you kind of whistle your way down to, if the business was in trouble and we could only deliver to one customer, which customer would it be? And then you just keep doing that process. And that's basically how you end up with a set of milestones. Now, in the process of doing that, of course, what tends to happen is you're actually kind of splitting them and then suggesting back what might those milestones be. So it's kind of a straw person thing, right? You're saying, I've heard you, and I think what you're saying is that we're going to unlock this value, then we're going to unlock this value, then we're going to unlock this value. And if your stakeholders are going, what? No, that's not valuable. That's not what I mean. You go, great. Let's try a different version of that kind of thing. And you just like keep working around until that set of milestones is clear. Once that set of milestones was reasonably clear, that's when I started actually looking at, what is the actual effect on the addressable market, what is the actual value proposition, and so on. And so what already existed was the product capability. So there was already a big bunch of epics that were just sitting there, right? And the epics were in your usual sort of Kanban board style. And then it was just a matter of kind of lining up those epics with each of the milestones and getting to that point. And this is something that we do weekly. So we've got a weekly cadence around planning around this board. And during the week, we're basically coming up with proposals to change it. So it's like we get some new information, new deal comes along, whatever it is kind of thing. We propose that, and then as a cross-functional group, we all agree what the change is going to be. And then every couple of weeks when there's the all hands, we play back what's changed, like a diff to the whole team to say what's actually changed.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thanks for that. So just a quick follow-up question on that. So what happens if because right now I have a similar thing, but on Excel sheet. So it's actually quite cool to visualize this. But between myself and stakeholders, we don't necessarily agree with the product milestones itself. For the first like milestone B, for example, like I think we should do A, and then our co-founder will be like, oh, I think we should do B. So how do you align, and how do you get to the bottom of which milestone to tackle first?
Yeah, well, that's where you get into the whole business of decision-making protocols and ways of doing decision-making and so on. The easiest way to do that is that someone has to have the casting vote, basically, right? So you really need, like, who's the CEO here? Who's making the final decision? Who's the one who's going to be accountable for making that decision? Sometimes with those sorts of things, you can kind of agree to disagree, or you can agree that, okay, we haven't decided yet, but let's decide what will make that decision. So rather than deciding A is more important than B or B is more important than A, let's agree what set of questions, experiments, whatever it is. If all of those things are true, that means B is better than A. So it's like, let's at least agree what is the criteria to make the decision, and then start working our way through that, rather than just straight up having to make the decision on the basis of one person's opinion or two people's opinion.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. No worries. And good on you for doing that in a sheet. That's a good idea.
Jax, you had your hand up, and I know Andrew, you put yourself so.
Thank you. Gareth, thanks so much for that. It was a lovely summary and like reminders and education. I was going to drill into the decision-making roles and the ownership aspect of the things that we're looking at, because so often that is what I am ensuring we have in order to move forward. Is your role, when you work with people and you like bring these tools out depending on what they need, is your role to facilitate a lot of that kind of decision-making? And you mentioned about like what will need to be true for that decision-making, but how do you know you've got the right people in the room, I guess, to have the conversations anyway? Is that something you also guide on?
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a reverse engineering exercise, right? It's like you've got to observe enough of who's doing those things anyway to be able to get a bit of a picture of what might be happening. The thing that I've done a number of times, which I still think is like as much of a kind of business cliche as it is, it does work, is your good old RACI or ASCII matrix, right? So, and it's the straw person again. So in the same way that defining the milestones, the easiest way to do it is just bash out the milestones and then make people angry by showing them the milestones and then incorporating their feedback. It's the same with the RACI matrix, right? You just stick people on it and the roles on it and what their accountabilities and responsibilities are, and then you show them, and then they're like, "Whoa, no, that's not right. I need to be," and then you just keep going around and around and around until you've got something that's at least workable and keeps things moving. And it's still, it's the same. It's the good old change management thing where you have to keep reassuring people that, look, this is not cast in stone. We can change this, but let's just give it a go. What's the worst that could happen? Let some decisions be made and things, and then we'll see how it establishes over time. I'm fortunate with this particular one, my most recent example of having this working in practice, that they already had a straw person RACI matrix, and it still had a few blank spots on it, and that was actually really, really useful to be able to take it forward.
Thank you. It's great to know. It's quite reassuring that that put it up and see who disagrees method is actually a pretty good method. Thank you so much.
In my experience. You're welcome. Thanks, Jax.
Oh, Andrew, did you have a question or?
It's all right, I can wait because I've actually got to go to another meeting right now. So
everyone probably does.
Yeah, really enjoyed that. That was really
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for coming along.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, have we got any quick questions for the last minute? Well, I mean, we're at time now.
We're at time, yeah.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Gareth, for
you're welcome. Yeah.
to talk to us for our collab office hours. So I just need to share my screen again, just to tell everybody a little bit about what courses we've got coming up. So let me just bring that up. Cool. So we've got a couple of growth opportunities coming up. We've got a next webinar on the 6th of May. So if you follow us on LinkedIn, you'll be able to see the details of that. We've also got a couple of programs coming up in July and June. So that's starting pretty soon. But if you want more information on those, visit www.collabcohorts.com. Cool. All right. Thank you again for coming along, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Cheers. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.